Welcome to part two of this interview. Oh my gosh, I can't believe someone who was a thief all of a sudden gets hurt on your property and then sues you for millions of dollars. It seems so wrong on our core morally to have somebody do that kind of stuff. So how you protect yourself is really, really important.
Welcome to the Jennifer J. Hammond Podcast. Jennifer is a licensed realtor, educator, speaker, and best-selling author. Jennifer's goal is to help you find your yay in every day.
Some quick background on me. I'm an attorney and have been for well over 30 years. I started out in an international law firm with about 1,000 lawyers all over the world, and then went to an international oil company, which is now merged with British Petroleum. And then for a number of years represented the world's largest airline, and that was by far the funnest job. And I did all of that as a trial lawyer. I sued people and companies for a living. But one particular case turned everything around for me and caused me to quit being a trial lawyer and become an asset protection attorney. And it was this. Normally in a trial, it's one company suing another, and the loser just writes a check and life goes on. But in this particular case, it was individuals who were suing. And I was representing the company that had fired them wrongfully. They had the winning case. They had been terminated because of age. That's age discrimination, and you cannot do that. So they had a great case. They should have won, but because we were very good lawyers, we won the case. And as I mentioned, normally it's not a big deal. You know, somebody writes a check and life goes on. But here, these people had lost their jobs, they had lost their incomes, lost their pensions, and they were financially destroyed. And that was wrong. And I was part of that wrong. And at that point, I said, I cannot do this anymore. It's not right. And I took everything I learned about suing people and companies, and I now use it to protect people from lawyers like I used to be.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe someone who was a thief all of a sudden gets hurt on your property and then sues you for millions of dollars. It seems so wrong on our core morally to have somebody do that kind of stuff. So how you protect yourself is really, really important. So again, I'm definitely, we'll do other shows and we want to dig deeper into some of the tax issues. But before we do that, I wanted to open it to our speakers. John Lee, I wanted to see, I hope you're there and you're listening. Do you have any questions for our attorney, Bob, to talk about asset protection? John Lee is also a real estate investor, and he has, over the years, he started with mortgages, and then he started actually getting property after property. So he actually works with a lot of land, which is different than others. So John's not picking up. So I'm assuming that John's in a listen only mode. Oh, there you are, John. Oh, he's in a listen only mode. Hey, John.
Hi. Good morning, Jennifer. Thank you. We had a bad connection here. I do have one quick question, and thank you, Bob, for all the great information. My question would be, I've got a small property that we're getting ready to fix right now, and I met with a guy who is he's actually somebody that owes me some money buying another property, and he's kind of not really a handyman, but he does drywall and stuff. Should I just be concerned about liability with him working on the property? It's a short-term project, or should I just go ahead and continue to run everything through my LLC like I've always done, or should I have some extra concern there, Bob?
Yeah, good question, John. I would have caution and make sure that anybody doing work on your property is, first of all, bonded, insured. People often ask, are you insured? Yeah. and they don't go further than that, ask to see documentation, make sure they're really bonded and
I was
insured.
going to say, I actually learned that the hard way as well. People will say, "Oh yeah, I've got the insurance," and I had some people that were looking at doing a roof job, and I was like, roofs people can fall off of roofs. And all of a sudden, when I started to, after they said, "Yeah, we're insured," I went ahead and I said, I actually would really like to see that documentation. Could you just email it over? And that's when they went, "Well, we're actually not in my state." And they, because I have DC, Virginia, and Maryland, they are actually in other states, but not mine, which happens a lot with Washington, DC area, because Virginia and DC are so close to each other, and Maryland. So we often had that. So that is, I think, a key thing is to one. So I'm sorry, I jumped in there before. I want you to finish answering that question. So number one, you should ask them to see their documentation, no matter how long you've known them or whatever. You can use the excuse that my wife said I have to do this, or you could say my lawyer said,
my banker says I have to.
My banker said I have to get a copy of it. Do you mind just sending it over? And people who have it don't mind at all. They literally, it's boom, it's super fast. They just email it to you and it's done. I learned that, as I said, the hard way from my roof. And it was interesting because, of course, there was very different prices for people who were insured versus people who are not. And I was like, but they have to, they're paying for their insurance. So it's a business cost for them. So I understand it. Anyway, I totally interrupted you. So then again, what other things that should John be doing that would help protect him even more?
Well, and John, you mentioned, should I run it through my LLC like I usually do? And the short answer is yes. And think about what LLC means. It stands for Limited Liability Company. It limits your liability. So anytime you can limit your liability, use an entity that'll do that by all means. So that's a quick and dirty answer. I'm sure we could talk about that in much more detail, but yes.
Absolutely. Okay, good. And now I was going to go to David. I don't know if you're in listen only mode. Would you like to ask a question too? Welcome.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Yeah, it's really awesome to be here with Bob. He's so smart, and I could ask questions for that whole remaining half hour. But I met Bob at the Heroes Coaches Conference down in Key West, Florida.
What? Key West? That's where I'm from.
Yeah. Where things broke free, and they were able to go down there, and we could have a conference in a safe manner. It was great. I met Bob, and he's so smart. This is an amazing time to have, and we're not even having to pay anything right now. So everybody ought to ask a question for free. This is cool. But Bob, I'm really interested just in your perspective of the mixture of how you might combine land trust with asset protection and kind of the difference, between those two. And I don't want to make it an open-ended question, but just, I'm always amazed at, the concept of LLCs and asset protection, and then also with, estate planning type and protection from like land trust. So just a few words on, your thought about mixing those and stuff.
We commonly do that. Land trusts are a very good tool for a number of reasons. They provide anonymity. They shield you from having to be on the title. So in other words, the trust is on the title to the property. Your name doesn't have to appear on the title. And that gives you a lot of advantages in the sense that who's more likely to be sued? Someone who owns 25 properties or someone who owns no properties whatsoever? Lawyers work on a contingency fee basis when they're suing. And if they think you have no assets, they do some quick math and think 50% of zero is zero. So why would they bother to sue if they can't get anything from you? So a land trust is valuable in the sense that it makes it appear that you own fewer or no assets than you really do. It gives you that anonymity. The land trust in and of itself does not provide liability protection the way a limited liability company does. So in a trust, we have both a trustee and a beneficiary, and we use LLCs for both the trustee and the beneficiary because, again, that provides anonymity and very, very good liability protection. One of the other aspects is that you mentioned estate planning. Because a land trust is a living trust, it would avoid probate. So in other words, what a lot of real estate investors don't realize is that when they own real estate in various states, they may have to go through probate in every one of those states when they pass away, which is a nightmare for those you leave behind. When we do use land trusts in connection with limited liability companies, then you're not going to go through probate. The land trust itself avoids probate. So those are only a couple of the advantages of using land trusts. And we do use land trusts in combination with limited liability companies as well. Yeah. Good question.
I think that was awesome. And I'm going to ask you, so first of all, I'm going to start bringing some people up who've raised their hands. So anyone who's in the audience right now, if you want to raise your hand, I'm going to start bringing you guys up and you can ask questions. So first of all, Shelly, she is, there you go. Hi, Shelly. Do you have a question for Bob?
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you for taking my question. Just real quick. So can you use asset protection for like anything that's not involved with real estate, like your own personal residence or your own personal assets?
By all means, that's very, very commonly done as well. Anyone can have any kind of a business or just have assets and have a need to protect them from perceived liability. By all means, we can use any number of tools that would give you reduced or limited liability. Yes, good question.
Okay, and how would someone go about doing that? Like, say if you're purchasing, whatever it is that you're doing or you want to protect, how would you go about doing that?
Well, we'd want to analyze the vulnerabilities that you might have where you could be liable, and then determine what would best foreclose those kinds of liabilities and or protect you from them. So that would involve a consultation with a knowledgeable attorney, and you'd want to be able to specify what you perceive to be your liabilities and what assets you want to protect.
And that let me jump in real quick. I'm sorry. So Shelly, one of the things that is really important is also, and I don't know if you're up for sharing what specifically, like we were just talking about a rental property, or we're talking about different specific things. So Bob, you also will give people a free consultation. I mean, we've got another 25 minutes, I think, in here. Or no, 20 minutes. We got about 20 more minutes in here. And I'm obviously anybody who wants to, I see some, raise your hand and ask questions, but you also will talk to people for free. They can just call your office and make an appointment, right?
Yes, we can have a short 15-minute quick consultation and get an idea of if there's some way that we can point you in the right direction. And if so, then more than happy to help.
Yeah, so feel free, again, info@assetdefenseteam.com, info@assetdefenseteam.com. And so Shelly, do you have a specific business that you're thinking about, or a specific thing that you're trying to protect?
No, not a specific business or anything, but like I was thinking like maybe like your personal residence or things like that.
So a trust, maybe? What would you suggest, Bob?
Well, once again, we want to examine in a little more detail that, but a trust could be a possibility. There are different kinds of trusts that are both revocable and irrevocable that we might consider using. There could possibly be single member LLCs. There could be possibly other types, maybe a limited partnership of depending upon any number of factors. If the personal residence is owned with someone else, there could be a form of joint ownership that we could use. Tenancy by the entireties is often used in various states among husbands and wives. So it all depends upon what the particular situation is, and that's why we have the consultation to determine those facts.
Okay, good. We have some other questions. I want to make sure we don't run out of time. So we have Eddie. Eddie, do you want to share, or do you have a question that you have for Bob?
Yes, good morning.
I'll probably definitely need to do a consultation with Bob, and it'll probably go a little bit more than 15 minutes. But the general question, Bob, you talked about a couple things for asset protection. All of my properties are presently in an LLC. We have general liability against on all of our properties, and we also placed an umbrella insurance policy over all of the properties. We had a child die at one of our properties. Fortunately, we were not found liable, but when that happened, it scared the heck out of me because I could have lost everything, with a lawsuit. So in addition to what I presently have in place, the general liability on the properties and the umbrella, what other things could I do? Because I also have to think about the financing. If I put things in land trust, does that affect the present financing that I have in place because it changes possibly the ownership? That's my question.
Yeah, so sorry to hear about that tragic happening on your property. It's awful. But it is something that illustrates what can happen, and life happens, and tragic accidents do occur. We would really need to look at the specifics, what states, what properties, how they're currently protected, to determine if there is a different structure that we could use. That doesn't necessarily mean undo everything that you've already done. It simply often means to maybe add an entity here, have these entities owned by another entity perhaps, and create different layers of liability protection, just as you've done on the insurance side. You've done well. You've insured the properties, and yet you have an umbrella policy. Those are different layers of insurance. And we can do the same thing in terms of layering with liability protection, so that if one barrier doesn't hold, at least there are other barriers that they would have to get through in order to get at your assets. So that would involve really a more in-depth consultation. And looking forward to having that with you. Be happy to.
If you could touch on one more thing, I've often heard the term piercing the corporate veil. What
Correct.
type of things would allow? Because on another side, I own a construction company, and all of my clients are, if they're not Fortune 500, well, Pilot Travel Centers, AutoZone. I mean, we do work for pretty large interest. Once again, thankfully, never had any issues, but I own a lot of assets on both sides of the table, if that makes sense. What things would, I guess, allow someone to pierce the corporate veil in a legal type situation? If you could just give one example of that.
Sure.
Please.
And I'm glad you raised that, because it's important not only to have the right kind of entity set up the right way, but then to operate the entity in a way that will maintain the limited liability protection. And so typically it is called an alter ego doctrine that allows someone to pierce the corporate veil. And piercing the corporate veil to anyone else simply means that they cut through the LLC or corporation or whatever it is and get at your personal assets. The whole idea of the limited liability is to limit your liability to the assets within that particular entity. So, and not be able to have your personal assets at risk. When they pierce the corporate veil, your personal assets do become at risk. And that will typically happen by commingling assets. We commingle business and personal assets. We might pay a personal credit card bill out of a business bank account. There are many different factors that courts look at, and there's no one factor that's determinative. They weigh the different factors and determine, was this entity operated in such a way as to maintain the separateness between the business and you personally.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Number one, you talk about piercing the corporate veil is something that people don't think about. Is number one, they just either don't put up any kind of asset protection, or number two, they don't understand the layering, as you said before, and the fact that people can pierce the corporate veil. So Eddie, that was awesome. Did you have one more thing, Eddie?
No, could you give me that email address again to reach Bob? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's info at assetdefenseteam.com. So assetdefenseteam.com, info at assetdefenseteam.com. And yeah, he has a great team there as well to help. And I highly recommend that you go ahead and reach out to him. Yay!
All right, Bob, I live in McKinney, Texas, so I'm in the DFW area. All of my real estate is in Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas. So I only invest there, but I'll reach out to you. So we're in the same city.
All right. Well, great, Eddie.
Yeah, I look forward to it. That's awesome. Thanks, Eddie. And then I wanted to go ahead before, again, we ran out of time. We have Cece. Cece, did you want to go ahead and ask a question for Bob?
Yes, I do. Hi, Jennifer.
Hello.
Thank you for doing this. And thank you.
You're
hello,
welcome. Go right ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Bob, for doing this. Yes, I do have a question. If you consider, oftentimes asset protection and tax planning goes hand in hand. And so with regards to partnership, assuming you want to start like a business with another partner, and you also want to, you are looking at tax protection and looking at the entities that work, and as well as asset protection and anonymity. What would be the best thing to do about that instead of just having the entity and maybe have an agent or something like that? Is there an alternative to that?
Well, what I often do is consult with your tax professional when we're in the process of setting up a structure or even designing a structure. We often will want to talk with your accountant, your CPA, or enrolled agent, whoever's doing your taxes, and make sure that we're all on board, because they may have some specific information that I may not have. Because they're working on a different side of things. They're working on the specific tax side, and so we do this as a team. In other words, we want to make sure that anything we do on the asset protection side is going to work hand in glove with the tax strategies that you may have with your tax professional going forward. And if we don't have tax strategies, we need to get some. So we'll be wanting to introduce that to your tax professional as well.
Okay, so what are the aspects of the partnership? So assuming the entity has been created and is tax optimized, now with respect to asset protection and anonymity in a partnership, how do you think of, how would be the best way to go about that?
Well, I'm not 100% sure of your question. If we've gotten an optimal tax strategy and now we have an entity with somebody else, I assume, is that correct, Cece?
Yes, with somebody else, yes. But at the same time, you want the anonymity so that people don't just look you up and then go to sue just because.
The anonymity.
Anonymity.
So, yeah. She wants to make sure that nobody can find out that they're partners.
I see. Well, that would come into play when we structure the entity in the first place. Well, we would have to design the entity in such a way, determining what information is revealed in that particular state when we file. Some states require a lot of disclosure, other states do not. And so we would, first of all, want to set up the entity in a state where you do not have to disclose much information. And if we have to file in a state where a lot of disclosure is required, then we can use various trusts to provide anonymity for you so that information remains anonymous and private.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate
it. You bet.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. And I want to say to the audience, we have a couple more minutes here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. That's that what is it? The third button over. If you're a newbie and you don't know where the buttons are, there's the microphone, the plus, and then there's of course the raise your hand button. And so I'm going to go ahead and I don't see any more raised hands. I always try to make a thing. I was trying to, John a lot of times also helps with moderating in here. Sometimes I forget to make sure that we get him. So I wanted to go back to David. I know David said that he also might have another question. Do you want to have one more question with Bob before we're at the top of the hour?
Yes, I guess I'm kind of curious about the out-of-state concept with properties, and it might be more of a tax question too. So that's really important to know what you said about, say, you get a rental house in Florida instead of Texas or some other state like that. Then to evict that tenant, if something goes wrong, you have to have someone represent you, and you have to have legal entity thing in it. But I think, isn't there ways to I guess your thoughts, Bob, on whether you create the LLC in the state where the property's at, or I've read about, you can like register your LLC in that state. Any difference between the two on maybe what some of your thoughts are on whether you form a completely new LLC for the state or try to do some way of registering it in that state?
Well, you're correct in the sense that you can have an entity formed in a particular state. So let's say you own property in Florida, and you don't live in Florida necessarily. Or let's say you live in, I'm going to say Texas. You own property in Florida, very common. And now the question is, you have a Texas LLC. Should you form a brand new LLC in Florida? Or should you just register your Texas LLC as a foreign entity qualified to do business in Florida? Those are both options. That presents a couple of issues that we would have to determine. And one is, is this just one property in Florida, or are we going to be creating a rental portfolio in Florida? If that's the case, if the latter is the case, then probably we would set up a Florida LLC because it would provide better liability protection for the grouping, and it would make sense. In other words, it's worth setting up the LLC in Florida. For one property, probably not, and then we would simply register that Texas LLC in Florida as a foreign entity. But it's important to realize that we do have to have that registration in the state, one way or the other, and the reason is, if you're renting to somebody, a citizen of Florida, you're doing business in Florida. And as a result, the state of Florida has an interest in making sure that citizen that renter is protected under Florida law, et cetera, that you are going to be complying with Florida law and procedures, that the state of Florida, at least knows who you are and that you're operating in the state, and that they have possibly a tax issue with you. In other words, if you're deriving income from that state, possibly they may want to tax you in that state on those earnings. So there are all kinds of state interests that arise and that would require you to want to be qualified to do business in that particular state.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand. And like I said, in the Washington, D.C. area, we're crossing state lines all the time.
All the time.
And I'm constantly, even with my real estate licenses, I'm constantly remembering, okay, this is what is allowed in this state. This is not allowed in this state. And oh my goodness, it is very different, the personalities of each one of those states and how they approach not only real estate, but also liability, asset protection. And of course, we're right next door, as you know, to Delaware. And Delaware has so many, at least from my viewpoint, it seems like they have so many benefits that some of the other states don't have. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes. And Delaware's long been viewed as a corporate headquarters, especially for publicly traded companies. Other states have kind of emerged for privately held companies as the place to go. But yes, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's really important, again, just to kind of have that overview of, and this is what I would say to you is if anybody wanted to reach out, feel free. You can reach out to Bob. It's not a high pressure sales, but he's definitely, he's always interested in helping. And if you heard his story, his personal story, his mission in life is to help people and to be on the good side of helping the good guys. And quite frankly, I want to say those of us who are successful, but not necessarily those of us who are the massive corporations who, as in his story, illustrated that sometimes in the court system, when you go to court, not always does the good guy win. It's the one who has the better lawyer who wins. And I want to say the better asset protection. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure we did this, to just highlight if you haven't looked at your asset protection strategies. So first of all, I know that one thing that a lot of times people ask is, I know probably the most dangerous thing is what I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so even for anyone who's interested in setting their goals, what would you suggest to somebody who is thinking about getting into rental properties as far as just setting up their goals and the basic liability structure that they should be looking for?
Well, if someone's thinking about getting into rental properties, get a guide, get a coach, get a mentor who can show you what mistakes to avoid, where the landmines are, so to speak. And that's on the offense side, so you don't make mistakes as you're trying to make money. But then on the defense side, because every game has an offense and a defense, on the defense side, have once again a guide, a mentor, so to speak. That would typically be an attorney who specializes in asset protection, who's aware of these issues and can make sure that you have the armor on, so to speak, before you go into battle, and make sure that as you do business, that you have limited liability, once again, that you're taking advantage of all the tax benefits that are out there, and that you do business in the most profitable and efficient way.
Well, that's beautiful. As I always end every room, I always want to end it with our yay. So I'm going to ask everyone who's in Clubhouse, John Lee, David, everyone, even Eddie, you're up on stage still. If you would come off your mics and let's say yay. And a big thank you, of course, to Bob. Thank you for being here. But Bob, also I ask if you would lift your voice and say yay as we go off the air. And thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield. You may know me as the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And if you want more help in getting from where you are to where you want to be, I want to encourage you to listen to the Jennifer Hammond Show. And if you want